Greetings. This is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul's Missionary Baptist Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. I recently heard Pastor Jamal Bryant, a pastor in Atlanta, Georgia, and he had some strong words against the governor of Georgia opening up the state and certain businesses from COVID-19. And I may be paraphrasing him. He said something like he's going to be opening up businesses and opening up caskets at the same time. And I really have a problem with that type of mentality. Black people have been manipulated and reduced to being emotional, shallow thinkers for some time now as a group. They've used the concept of groupthink in order to stoke emotionalism and identity politics within the Black community. I used to look at a lack of Black leadership or a lack of unity of voice as something that would, is the problem as to why we can't advance as a people. And even, in this nation, we've consistently gone backwards. We've consistently slid down the scale on various categories, like, for instance, wealth. Broken families, all these type of things. We as Black people have consistently gone down in the rankings, so to speak. There's a statistic that since 2000, African American community has been one of the only communities that haven't advanced financially. And that's among Asians, Hispanics, Africans, and other minority groups, that they have advanced while we have not. And here's the main problem that we have. So there's this mindset of Boule. So the Boule, the Black Boule and other organizations are leaders, supposed leaders in the Black community, but these aren't real leaders because they have actually been placed in positions of leadership by the ruling elite, if you will, by the powers that be, the power structure. And so because of that, they promote the same ideas that continue to fan the flames of emotionalism and racism and all those other things, but nothing ever gets accomplished. Let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, I went to a conference, Martin Luther King breakfast, NAACP type of event. And I heard the speaker speaking about how we can, as Black people, try to build our community back up again. And what I was astounded that the rhetoric was the same rhetoric that we've been hearing for years. As a matter of fact, in the mid 80s, me and my best friend, we were youth leaders for the local NAACP chapter. And I remember going to NAACP conferences back in the mid 80s, and almost word for word, the same rhetoric that we hear now in 2020, 2019, 2018 is the same rhetoric we've been hearing for decades. And I would venture to say that maybe even if you go back into the 50s and 60s during the Civil Rights Movement, a lot of the same rhetoric that we were hearing then are the same things that we hear now. So what they do is they always bring up access to affordable health care. They always talk about schools and education. We need to pour more money into education and schools and criminal justice reform and social programs to help the poor and the needy out. So these are all the same topics that we hear over and over again. But what happens is we have politicians, and primarily Democrat politicians, that they come around and they give you the same speeches every election cycle, but nothing ever changes. And so also what they do is they put in place this Boule-minded leadership, these leaders that put in place, some people define the term as it's called control opposition. When you want to control those who you oppose, you actually put people in place that are pretending to be in opposition to you, but in essence, they actually are employed by you to carry out your agenda. So nothing ever gets accomplished. So we still have the same talking points over and over again, but nothing ever changes. Things like, like I said, affordable housing and all these things that we've been saying as a community we need for many decades. But we still keep electing and voting for the same political parties and the same leaders that never bring us to any type of resolution, because they use words that stoke your emotions, but there's no logic behind it. There's not a lot of facts behind it, but we just keep getting emotional, but everything stays the same. There's no change in how we are doing things, and we are ignoring the core issues, and we're mad at the wrong people consistently. So this theme of racism or victim mentality is always the thing that they use over and over again. And I see this as the same thing, for Jamal Bryant and some of these other leaders, quote unquote leaders, to say they're trying to open up our communities because they want to kill us. They're opening up caskets the same as at the same time that they're opening up businesses. Is really again, it's like a smoke and mirrors or gaslighting, as they say it. It's like you're putting up a big fuss about something to distract people, but actually they're ignoring the core issues and really ignoring some very foundational truths that we all should know about. So the power structure, the leadership that's in place in the Black community, they keep us functioning at a lower emotional level, which hinders us from using reasoning and logic. It also increases our suggestibility and allows them greater success of having us to accept their agenda without any resistance. And so this narrative of the governor of Georgia opening up barbershops and beauty salons and everything is to target Black people for us to die it just goes along the same narrative that we hear over and over again. And there's some very core things that it ignores that I'm going to get into in this talk that I hope you have an open mind and have ears to hear what is being said. Instead of reasoning at a higher level of logic, we stay in the emotional realm. And they are causing us to operate out of fear and impulsiveness, which fails to look at the bigger long-term picture. Because the bottom line is, if we fail to open this country back up again and begin to move into a certain level of normalcy, it will get much uglier. Think about this for a second. If we thought it was real ugly when people were fighting over toilet paper and hand sanitizers, can you imagine how ugly it will be if we continue to keep the country closed, if we continue to let small businesses fail and people lose their jobs? And so now, instead of fighting for toilet paper and hand sanitizers, they're going to be fighting for food and for being able to pay the rent and take care of their children. That is a much uglier fight that it will inevitably come to if we don't start using our logic and reasoning and stop allowing this false narrative to be moved forward. It's just common sense. And all of us can understand that. This is very easy to understand, that I saw the fights, that people were actually in fist fights over toilet paper because they had invoked so much fear in people that they weren't using their logic and reasoning skills. They were just panicking, right? So now you start talking about, hey, my business is closed. I lost my job. I have no money. My $1,200 stimulus has run out. Now I can't feed my family. I'm starving. What am I going to do now? That's when the real panic, that's when the real riots will occur. And so we have to be proactive and look at long-term things instead of using our emotions to look at things from a short-term perspective. And that's what happened. We're not being farsighted and looking at the bigger picture. We are allowing the powers that be to continue to keep us in a perpetual state of fear, giving up our individual rights with no clear path to going back to life as we know it. Unless you believe that at some point in time, it will be okay for us to be completely dependent on the government, because the government's going to have to take care of everybody, or a large portion of society. If you think about the middle and the lower classes, they will all be going away if we don't do something using logic and reasoning and using our God-given freedoms and liberties in order to move back to where we need to go to. Now, the three primary fallacies that this is exposed in those who we consider Black leaders, or even in mainstream media, these three primary fallacies of thought that we have embraced as Black people, because I've heard a lot of Black people, a lot of intelligent Black people, even repeating this particular narrative, and it lacks, it lacks understanding of the bigger picture. It lacks discernment, and it is based in fear and illogic. So here's the three primary fallacies. One is the victim mentality. Victim mentality is something that our leaders, our quote unquote leaders that have been placed before us, continually to push that narrative to keep us in a perpetual state of fear, anger, and lack of power, lack of personal power. The implication that Black people are hapless victims that exist at the whim of political powers and the government, instead of taking personal responsibility, for instance, for our health as individuals and communities, we want to constantly blame other people, the government, white people, all these people. We want to constantly blame them for a large portion of things that we have control over. So, for instance, they said that the COVID-19 has disproportionately killed, large numbers of black people in the black community. And we have acknowledged the fact that there is a lot of health discrepancies in the black community. A lot of those things are behavioral. So obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, those type of things are things that we can control as individuals, right? The greatest weapon that you have against any disease or virus is a strong immune system and a healthy body. Those are the two greatest weapons, not pharmaceuticals, not vaccines, but having a strong immune system and a healthy body is the greatest weapon against any disease, whether it's the common cold, the flu, or anything else. Those are the greatest tools that you have. And you have a large majority say in whether or not those things are in place. A healthy immune system and a healthy body. But instead of that, we want to point outside and say, hey, they're targeting us with this disease. If we have a healthy immune system and healthy bodies, even if someone targets you with some type of sickness, the greater possibility is that you will pull through it. As a matter of fact, statistically, you have the same percentage of dying from COVID-19 as you do from the common flu. 99% of the people that died from this had underlying health issues, whether it's obesity, whether it's high blood pressure, whether it's upper respiratory diseases or anything like that. 99% of those who died from it had some type of underlying health issue, whether it's elderly people, that are in nursing homes, people that already had compromised immune systems and compromised health. 99% of them are the victims of COVID-19, of the fatality of COVID-19. The second thing is governmental dependency. So instead of understanding the role and limitations of government, we're sitting by as a community with a false assumption that government controls your fate. You have the right not to open your business. Let me say that again. If you have a small business, a barbershop or a nail salon or beauty salon or whatever the case may be, you have a God-given right not to open your business if you feel like your health is in danger. You have a right not to patronize businesses, and you have a right to self-quarantine yourself if you choose to. Constitutionally and legally, these are rights that you possess. The notion that beauty salons are open and that we lack the self-discipline to stay home is disrespectful and is very patronizing to the intellect of black people. I'm going to say that again. The notion that just because they open up barbershops and beauty salons and nail salons, that we lack the discipline to not go there if we believe that we're in danger is not only disrespectful, but it is patronizing to me as a black person. I still have a right not to go into these places. I still have a right to social distance if I choose to. I have a right to where I go and what I do. And it's a God-given right that the government hasn't given me. So for us to sit around and to be completely dependent on the whim of the government to tell us what is safe and what is not safe for me as an individual and for my family shows a true ideal of governmental dependency that has been that agenda has been pushed into the black community and has been very prevalent since the 1960s. And I'm not going to get into that. If you got a chance to subscribe to my YouTube channel, look at my other things. I go into detail about LBJ and the war on poverty and the Moynihan report that said that how they set up the welfare system back from the 1960s was going to break down the family and remove the fathers out of the household. And true to form, that is one of the larger problems in the black community. The third thing is we lack political savvy and understanding individual rights and liberties. We lack political savvy as a black people. Now, I'm not talking about every one of them, but I'm talking about the majority of us. Think about this. We have what's called identity politics. And what identity politics is they have promoted the idea that if you're black, we all have the exact same political ideology. And many black people perpetrate that. So if you say that you're not a Democrat, and you're a Republican or conservative, they'll call you all kind of names. You're a sellout. You don't understand what's going on, and et cetera, et cetera. Right? Or like, for instance, you have to be pro-Obama and against Trump. You have to be that. It's like this monolithic idea that all black people think alike. Now, this is the majority. This is not everybody, but this is the narrative that's promoted. And if you look at social media, if you talk to friends and family members, you can see that that is an overwhelming fact of the matter. Right? Instead of us understanding the nuances of the political system and understanding political power and authority, power structures. So what happens is, as a community, you're not supposed to give a blanket approval to a political party. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to examine the issues and understand them from a constitutional and personal liberty perspective, in order for you to be successful, in order for it to help your community. I've heard people say that, a lot of the Republican platform is, Republican platform is about, and I'm just saying this from, these are facts, but this is from personal experience. They promote the private business sector. They promote self-reliance. They promote all those things and limited government. And so those are principles that we as black people have held for many, many generations. But yet, because of identity politics, we now support a party that directly goes against our very principles of our community, right? So black people have been consistently God-fearing, strong family over the generations. Recently, this has gotten weaker, self-sufficient, right? And we also believed in the Second Amendment. But even now, I see a lot of black people that support the Democrat Party who wants to limit your Second Amendment rights because of identity politics. So even though you may be a firm believer in certain personal rights and liberties, but because we have been manipulated, we have been socially engineered, we now support parties that go against the very core of our beliefs that our community has held for many generations. And we don't understand the political power. If you understand political power, if you understand authority, then what happens is you recognize that we are the ones who hold the power over the government. The government doesn't hold the power over us. And I've been saying this a lot recently because we need to re-educate ourselves and change our mindset, right? So think about this from a constitutional standpoint. The Constitution confirms that we have been given God-given inalienable rights by our Creator, right? So those rights weren't given to us by government. So if the government didn't give them to us, the government can't take them away from us. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The First Amendment guarantees me freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to peacefully assemble, freedom of the press, and freedom of redress. Now, what does that mean? It means that those are God-given rights given to me by the Creator, not by government, and so the government can't take that away. So legally, the government can't tell us that we can't assemble together, because that, as long as we are assembling peacefully, the government can't tell us not to do that. Legally, the government can't shut down a state or a city, because it can't restrict the free movement of individuals, because that's a God-given right that we have. Think about that for a second. How can you shut down a state or a city? How can you tell people that they have to stay in their homes, because that is a right that's given to us by God, that because the government didn't give it to us, it can't take it away from us. It can't suspend it, or it can't revoke those rights. Those are inalienable rights that can't be taken away from us. But because we lack political savvy, we are sitting around waiting for permission from the government to do what we have been given by God the right to do. I need you to understand that. I need you to understand how important these things are, because one thing that's very consistent, whenever a tyrannical government wants to move into place, the first thing they do is they quiet free speech, so you can't have a dissenting opinion or a dissenting view. A lot of social media platforms are actually suspending people for giving a idea or a narrative that goes against their main narrative or their agenda. The second thing they have done, whenever a tyrannical government comes into place, where there's communism, socialism, or any of these others, is not only did they limit free speech and you can't have a dissenting viewpoint against what what the government says, but they also shut down the churches. They hinder you from gathering together for worship, places of worship. That's why the First Amendment was so important. So the government can't rightfully tell you that you can't gather together in a religious observance. And I know a lot of religious leaders, they're going to parrot what the powers that be says. But ultimately, it is your right. Now, again, if you choose personally not to gather together in a crowd, that is your God-given right to do so. If you choose personally to socially distance, that is your God-given right. If you choose personally to wear a mask and wear gloves when you go in public and use hand sanitizers, that is your God-given right to do. But what you shouldn't do is allow the government to tell you that you don't have a choice in the matter. Because what they're preparing you for is they're going to tell you that you have to get a vaccine in order to go back into a normal life. And they're going to try to give you RFID chip. It's already in the works. Just look up ID 2020 and some of the other things that's already in the works, right? So this is a violation of your individual rights. And one thing is for certain, that whenever a government begins to take away your individual rights, very few times in human history has it willingly given them back to you, right? Just think about this right now. Most of you, if you go fly on a plane, you go and you take off your shoes and put them in the basket, right? You also go into one of those things where they x-ray you, and sometimes they'll strip search you or pat you down and grope you up and down, right? Those are rights. Those are things that they implemented based on 9/11, right? So they told you about some guy who was going to blow up a plane using his shoes. And so now we, like robots, just go through the motion and take off our shoes. And then, does anybody ever question that? Because they took the right away from you to get on a plane without going through their processes. And now they didn't give that right back to you. So we still take off our shoes without even reasoning it out and trying to figure out why we do what we do. Right. And it's a form of brainwashing. It's a form of manipulation. It's also a form of training people to receive and accept governmental overreach without any question. That's why freedom of redress was so important, because redress means we have the right to even question the authority in the government, and they have an obligation to answer our grievances. They don't have a choice in that matter. So instead, Black America, in conclusion, instead of listening to the controlled opposition Black leaders, instead of just brainlessly listening to mainstream media and the narrative that they're giving you, I would like for you to spend some time to elevate your thinking, educate yourself, begin to really think things through from a logical space and not from an emotional space, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to look at the big picture, because most of us, or the vast majority of us, will not accept the taking away of your God-given rights. But the question is, will you do it ahead of time, or will you wait to have to fight the uphill battle of trying to win them back once they're taken away from you? We have to use our higher intellect and our higher mind. We have to understand that we are free individuals because we have God-given rights that the government hasn't given us and can't take away from us. Think about the fact that people can't go to a public park right now. I should be able to go into a public park without the fear of being arrested or anything like that. I should be able to go to a beach. God created beaches. He created parks. So I should be able to go to those things without any fear of being arrested or fined or anything like that. We must stop with the shallow emotionalism that the powers that be are banking on us maintaining, and we must start to move as free beings that using the God-given rights that we have had from God and not from man. The last point I want to make as I bring this to a close is that the Constitution tells us and reminds us that government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. Right? It means that the government doesn't have authority over you. We, the people, have the authority over the government. We have to exercise those rights. And so you think about this. If we have certain God-given inalienable rights given by God, not by government, and the government only gets its authority from us, then instead of us waiting for the government to tell us how to live our lives, we